afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining in from. Welcome to our webinar. My name is Eric Aldana, and I am a product lead at Credo AI. If you're joining us for the first time, Credo AI, we build a unified AI governance platform that allows you to track and manage risk and compliance for your enterprise AI systems throughout their lifecycle. But in addition to being a software provider, we really pride ourselves in being an active leader and convener in the broader AI governance ecosystem so that we can better share and understand how different organizations, different industries can best govern this rapidly evolving technology within the context of the equally rapidly evolving regulatory and risk space. So with that context, I'm excited to be with you all today and build on our webinar series where we're really diving into how organizations are building and deploying trustworthy AI systems so your businesses can do the same. And today I'm excited to bring into the conversation one of our partner companies, AdeptID, who's been with us on this journey, one of the organizations who's been with us longest, frankly, to talk about governing and building trustworthy AI systems in the HR and hiring space. We strongly believe that AI governance is never going to be a one-size-fits-all approach. It's dependent on the context of your organization, your domain, your industry. And so we're excited to have Kathleen Cashel with us today from AdeptID to share more about how they've been tackling this in the HR and hiring space. And we'll have an opportunity in just a little bit to talk more about AdeptID. But before we get started, I just want to take a few minutes to go over some housekeeping and run of show. So I'll be sharing a little bit about how Credo AI is thinking about trusted AI overall. What does that even mean? How does compliance relate to trusted AI and where trust might go beyond just checklist compliance? I'd like to go over that before kind of passing it off to Kathleen to share AdeptID's story. At the very end, we're going to have a Q&A session. So please, during today's webinar, please feel free to use the Q&A module at the bottom of your screen to post any questions that you'd like us to address, and we'll pick a few to talk through at the very end, and also might be able to answer some along the way. All right. Great. Yeah, just a reminder of all of that. So cool. So to kick things off, really want to share a little bit about what we at Credo AI have been seeing in terms of how industry has been adopting AI, what some of the challenges we've seen as it relates to risk, compliance, and trust, and how kind of policy fits in with all of that. So just to start off, this is information kind of that we're starting to see more and more of as organizations are adopting AI, and potentially each of these three kind of challenges or things that y'all might have been facing in your own journeys to adopt AI. So we're seeing some very clear pains of adopting AI. So the very first one, difficulty in being able to show what is the ROI of your AI programs. More and more executives are saying that the AI initiatives that they're starting to roll out are seeing little return in terms of their delivery, and then also they've been seeing difficulty in scaling from those initial pilots or POCs into enterprise-wide deployments of AI systems. To that point as well, right? Like a lot of organizations are starting off projects, whether they're homegrown or third-party Gen AI projects. They start off as experiments, but have a very difficult time moving into production. And at the same time, we're seeing more and more incidents increasing that are related to AI safety, AI non-compliance. And this is becoming more and more the case, especially as new laws and regulations are coming out saying, hey, what does good look like in terms of actually deploying AI systems? And we have a nice little fun, spooky graphic just in time for Halloween in that regard. And I do think that all of those different safety incidents, right, are enforcing some of those challenges that we've seen before, right? The more and more risks that we are surfacing as the risk surface area of AI systems increases, it becomes harder and harder to feel trusted and trustworthy of your teams and being able to deploy them, right? Everything from internal usage. If you have an internal knowledge agent, you want to make sure that it's providing useful information. to your employees, and then the risk increases more and more as you expand who actually has access to your tools. So customer facing AI tools, for example, a lot of folks have a ton of trepidation about deploying those because of the unknowns related to risk and also the increasing compliance requirements they might have. So on that point, when folks think about AI governance, typically they think about compliance, right? They think about what are the different laws and regulations that are coming out, what are the different standards. So as we think about things like the NIST AI risk management framework, which has been around for a number of years at this point, the EU AI Act, which is starting to become more and more defined, right, in terms of like what the expectations around scoring are. We're passing the dates where particular aspects of that law are starting to be enacted. And at the same time, we're seeing more and more states, countries passing their own laws and regulations, right? While we've had kind of this stall in efforts around having either a global or regional frameworks for how to govern and regulate AI, we're starting to see a number of smaller jurisdictions kind of take measures into their own hands and creating different laws or policies for their particular jurisdictions, but then also laws or policies that are related to specific use cases of AI. So one thing I want to call out, and why I'm excited to have Kathleen here, is the HR space has been one of those places where AI regulations, or at least as how policymakers have been thinking about AI regulations, have been around for a couple of years at this point. And so really kind of the HR space has been one of the places that have we've seen kind of or can take a lot of learning from in terms of how those regulations have evolved over the past few years. So looking ahead to 2026, now that we're just wrapping up the last quarter of this year, these are some of the principles that we want to kind of go into 2026 with, which is, first off, like as I was discussing, global fragmentation is here. There's not going to be a single rule book. There's not going to be a single one size fit all answer for what good AI governance looks like. It's important that you have a system and tooling to be able to identify, hey, what are the different laws or regulations that are relevant to the regions that I'm deploying AI systems in, that my business operates in, as well as the particular industries and domains that my AI use cases are going to be a part of. Risk management is universal. So this is one of the areas where it's important to make sure that you have updated understandings of what the different risk scenarios are, the different types of mitigating controls that are related to those risk scenarios, especially as the technology evolves, new incidents come out, and we have a better understanding of what we need to do to actually mitigate a lot of those new risks. Standards and self-governance will be key. Right now, we see, in addition to these specific laws and policies, a lot of voluntary frameworks and industry best practices that are starting, that have been around for a while and are being updated again as new technologies, new frameworks come out. We're starting to see a lot of these regulations start to incorporate more guidance around generative AI and agentic AI. And then finally, while this talk is really kind of centered around, where trustworthy AI governance expands beyond compliance, compliance is still a really important part in terms of making sure that you can prove to the market that your AI systems are actually fit for use, deployable, safe, and so want to make sure that everyone is aware, right, of what those compliance requirements are going to be. Great. So with a little bit of that framing, I want to discuss a little bit about what, if we were to think about compliance only being a component of building and deploying trustworthy AI system, what do we mean by AI trust? So yeah, the question at hand is, what is AI trust? We know that it is more than just having a compliance system. It's more than just having a system that accounts for risks. It's all of those things, right? And so we want to make sure that when we have a trusted AI system, we have assurance that it is compliant, right? We know what the different regulatory requirements, what the industry best practices that are coming out are as the technology evolves, that we're keeping up to date with those requirements. We know that the system is secure. And this means that in many cases, different functions and teams at your organization, whether they're data privacy or cybersecurity, need to be part of what AI governance looks like, right? AI governance is not just a subset of security. It's not a subset of data privacy. It really is something that fits along all of these different areas. AI trust means that our AI is human-centered, and that incorporates elements around knowing that your organization has the AI literacy needed to be able to use AI in a way that is productive and creative and useful to the business aims that you're trying to achieve, and not something that you're just kind of letting go off on its own. And finally, your AI system needs to be focused on return on investment. And what we mean by that is the AI system actually allowing you to achieve your business goals and not deviate from that, right? And that's something that compliance isn't necessarily always going to be thinking about, right? The EU AI Act doesn't care about token rate limits or reputational risk or things like that. But it's still an incredibly important part about making sure that your system is trustworthy, especially when a lot of your customers or clients, right, might be making decisions about like what models to select based off of things like cost. So I'm really excited to talk a little bit more with Kathleen about kind of how AdeptID has been thinking about this, right? As I mentioned, there have been a lot of laws, regulations that are coming out, both that apply to AI generally, as well as to the HR space in particular. And so before kind of like getting to that, I do want to set up the framing as well that what we've been seeing in the ecosystem is that a lot of these requirements and these risks that are seen in these different laws and policies, there is a lot of overlap. Um, and to this point, we've started to map out what does a unified system of risks, a unified framework of controls look like, and really highlighting that governance doesn't need to be a place where we are going to every single one of these laws and policies and having a checklist for every single one of them. Instead, what could that unified checklist be in terms of these are the law, or these are the requirements, these are the risks that we need to prioritize, and based off what we focus on, see where we're actually meeting different compliance requirements, different frameworks. And so this is one of the elements that we named the Unified Control Framework for AI risk and for AI governance. And one of the key components, I think, that is important to understanding, how you can remain compliant while also considering all of these other aspects as well. So one kind of like last piece I want you all to walk away with as we think about trustworthy AI and AI governance. So at Credo AI, we like to think about AI trust being an outcome of AI governance, right? And so if ultimately you want to develop trustworthy AI, it requires AI governance. And AI governance in itself is not an outcome, right? Ultimately, you want to make sure that your systems are trustworthy. That, again, like the slide from before, you're making sure that they are meeting their business goals, they're compliant, they're assessing for risk, they're human-centered. And so that's just a key element that I'm hoping you all kind of walk away with. All right. So to kick off a little bit, or to frame, I guess, what Kathleen is going to be sharing. So AdeptID has been a partner with Credo AI for, I guess, at least over a couple of years at this point, and really been a partner in understanding, right, what the best way to govern your AI systems are. And so we're just sharing this to give you a sense of where the Credo AI platform fits within your company's tech stack. Essentially, it's important to know that, as I mentioned, like there are a bunch of different laws, regulations, your own internal company policies that you want to make sure that you're compliant with. So that's that top layer. And at the bottom layer, there might be a bunch of different tools that you're using for different aspects of governance, model monitoring, et cetera, that you want to make sure that you have a single place to orchestrate. So at the bottom, you'll see kind of what are the different data governance tools, what are different cybersecurity tools, and where Credo AI, I think, really helps a lot of organizations is putting all of that together in one unified place. So if I realize, hey, this new law came out, I need to be compliant with it. My information exists in a bunch of different places. Where can I go to make sure all of that is orchestrated and carried forward so I can generate, a single bias audit, for example, that I need to give to a regulator to show that I'm meeting this requirement. So um, that was probably the fastest I've ever kind of shared, like, here's how the Credo AI platform works. But just to give you that context, wanted to share this with you. Awesome. All right. Well, that's enough from me. I really kind of the meat of this conversation. Really want to dive into Kathleen and AdeptID story and how they've been building trustworthy AI and employment and talent matching. And really just want to highlight again, they are a partner. We've been working together, but I'm also just such a big fan of what they're doing. Right. I think that AdeptID is really thinking about using AI in the right way, and I'm excited for you all to learn more about their work. So, Kathleen, I'll hand it off to you.
Thanks, Eric. That was really great and really informative. So, hi, everyone. My name is Kathleen. I'm one of the data scientists at AdeptID. And to give you a little bit of background, AdeptID is a public benefit corporation, and we are working on building fair and transparent AI solutions, specifically around talent matching use cases. And so we're based in Boston, and we were founded in 2020. And almost from the very early beginnings, we've been partnering with Credo AI. And so in terms of the products that we build, essentially we have a number of API products. And so these are used for a bunch of different use cases within the hiring context. So specifically, we're looking at things like candidate match, candidate search, and job search. And so these APIs are used by our customers, such as leading kind of like HR tech platforms, applicant tracking systems, human capital management systems. And so they're kind of behind the scenes there. And then additionally, as AdeptID, we also own and operate an AI-empowered healthcare staffing firm. And so to kind of give you a bit more detail on what these kind of core solutions APIs look like, the first kind of prominent one is like a candidate search or match product. And so what that means is when you have a job posting and you have a bunch of candidates that apply for that specific job, this model is used to assess the degree of fit between the candidate that applied and the job description. And so this is a model that is kind of looking very holistically across a candidate. And what we're really kind of focusing on is skills-based, competency-based hiring. And so this model is looking at a candidate's work history, what their kind of experiences have been, what kind of skills they have, what their educational background is, what degrees they have, what certificates, et cetera. And we're comparing that against what's required by the job so that we're able to kind of surface kind of concrete fit recommendations about how this candidate does or does not fit. And then kind of very similar to that is a talent candidate search product. And so in this use case, you would have a recruiter who is looking against a database of candidates. And so they have a job that they're hiring for, and they have very specific requirements, and they're trying to find candidates for that specific job. And so in this context, our model is going to surface candidates that we think are a really good fit. And then the last one is job search. And so this is primarily geared at customers that are helping candidates, so typically kind of like certification programs, try to understand where their skills fit in on the market. And so a candidate is able to kind of say, okay, this is my background, these are my skills, my education, and then we're able to recommend jobs based on kind of their background that fit. And so for us, since we're in this algorithmic hiring use case, it is incredibly high stakes. And we think of compliance and governance as being incredibly important. And so our models have kind of direct impact on people's lives. And so this is something that we're kind of always thinking about. When we go to update a model, that single model update or a change to the underlying data or inputs has the potential to cause systemic harm. So this is something that we're kind of constantly monitoring. And so governance to us is very important because it provides kind of clear processes and guardrails that we need to follow. As Eric kind of mentioned, there's a bunch of different regulation in this space. hiring is kind of unique in that, in some sense, we have kind of like very older civil rights legislation that we are also regulated by. And then we also have kind of this newer AI sector specific regulation. And so there's kind of a lot to keep track of. And in that sense, our partnership with Credo has been incredibly valuable to kind of keep track of all of these entities and things that we need to ensure that we're having proper documentation and process on. And then I think kind of our last point is that we really believe in that these models should be trustworthy. And that, you know, when these models are fair and trustworthy and explainable, they benefit job seekers, they benefit our customers, and it helps us build a better product. So when we talk about kind of bringing AI into hiring, our primary tenet is that this should be incredibly human-centered. And so our role is not that these models are kind of replacing recruiters or hiring managers or whoever you think of as making a hiring decision, but that it's able to kind of surface extremely relevant information to them. And so when we're thinking about, well, how can we improve our models, we're having conversations with recruiters about saying like, well, what is the information that you need in order to help you understand if this candidate is someone you should kind of pull forward in the recruiting pipeline? And so to kind of give you kind of a concrete example about that, when we think about our candidate match product. So we are telling kind of a recruiter or somebody in that applicant tracking system what the degree of fit is for a given candidate in a job. But something that we're really proud of is our match report offering. And so in addition to that degree of fit, we also kind of return this whole explanatory report that is able to kind of surface to the recruiter, hey, well, this candidate is a match on these skills, but they're missing these core skills that were required as part of a job, or they applied for this RN position that requires like specific experience on certain equipment, and they have this equipment, but this one certificate isn't up to date and that's required. And so kind of like really digging into concrete points that a recruiter can use to say, okay, yes, like this is someone we want to continue to invest in our hiring pipeline. And then additionally, this focus on like skills and competency is really important to us. So when we think of kind of defining trustworthy AI, that is often kind of a very big word in this regulatory space. And so internally, we kind of think about it as having like 4 kind of large components. So I think the first one for us is definitely fairness. So when we're thinking about our models and our development work, we're constantly kind of measuring bias and ensuring that we're prepared to mitigate any bias that we kind of come across. We're doing kind of proactive red teaming, internal audits, things like that to make sure that kind of every model update is kind of very closely tracked, and that we're also continuously monitoring kind of deployed products. Then the second component to that is explainability. So that's going to kind of touch on that match report that I mentioned previously. We want to make sure that when we're recommending a candidate or trying to explain that this candidate may not be a good fit, we have very clear reasons, and we can say, you know, these skills or this background, part of their background isn't a right fit. And so that we're able to kind of build that trust with recruiters and with hiring managers. And so they have a clear understanding as to why our model made a certain decision. And then the third component is privacy and security. So our models aren't using PII is a big kind of tenet that we have. And then additionally, a larger part of compliance is kind of adhering to global privacy laws, things like PIPEDA and GDPR, and making sure we're compliant there. And then the fourth one is kind of that human-centered design component, that when we're building kind of these AI technologies, we're really thinking about how to like augment kind of a recruiter's knowledge and help them make better decisions, as opposed to kind of, you know, trying to replace them in that role. So in terms of kind of staying ahead of global regulations, as Eric's kind of presentation alluded to at the beginning, this is starting to get increasingly challenging when we're in a space where we have kind of state legislation, federal legislation, different entities that we have to track. Specifically at AdeptID, kind of to give you kind of concrete examples of that, we have like the EU AI Act. The EU is certainly an important jurisdiction for us, and so we've been working with Credo to ensure that we're compliant there. Additionally, for many years now, we've worked with Credo to ensure compliance with New York Local 144, and that is a specific sector-specific legislation in New York City about using AI kind of assisted hiring tools. And so every year we conduct an annual audit and work very closely with Credo to kind of ensure that we're publicly kind of presenting this audit information. Additionally, I think one of the advantages that we have of being a startup is that we don't have a lot of legacy infrastructure. And so this has kind of been our mindset from day one. We've been early partners with Credo, and so we have this ability to kind of not make compliance a bolt-on, but every time we're thinking about kind of model updates, this is part of our development cycle, and it's a very kind of natural process for us to be both monitoring trying to assess future risk, and then also looking at kind of what legislation is forthcoming. And I think that has certainly been one of the advantages of partnering with Credo, is because as such a small startup, it would be really challenging to deploy resources to keep track of all of this different legislation across the world. And so now when we have our syncs with the Credo AI team, where we're kind of able to say, hey, did you hear about Colorado? Like, this is on our radar. Can you tell us what we need to do? And they're like, yes, we have a policy pack coming for that. And we're like, great. And so this has been just a really great kind of synergistic relationship there. And then to give you kind of like a little bit more kind of concrete detail, specifically about why we value this Credo AI partnership. So Credo provides this kind of like centralized platform for us. And so it makes our lives much easier from the perspective that we have these use cases that we're tracking, these different APIs, the different customers, what parts of the world they're deployed in. And through that, we're able to get kind of very precise feedback from the Credo team to say, hey, this new Utah piece of legislation that starts in January of 2026, that's going to apply to this use case, but not this use case. And so that is kind of very quickly able to narrow our focus down to exactly what we need to do. Additionally, like, we're able to kind of put all of our documentation in one place. Everything kind of has version history. It's all there, and then we can easily upload that into our trust center, or when we're having conversations with customers, we can surface this information very easily to them. And then kind of like the last point is the Credo AI team is incredibly plugged into this upcoming regulation. They're experts on this, and so it's very handy for us, but also just a great experience to work with someone to say, hey, like, this is what we're thinking about in terms of upcoming legislation. This is how we've planned our development cycle. Like, do you think this is going to be enough for us to be able to cover these different states and have those conversations very transparently? And so kind of just speaking a little bit to being an early stage kind of startup, one of the advantages there has certainly been that we have kind of designed our models around trustworthiness. But also what we're starting to see when we talk to our customers is that, particularly with kind of these advances in generative AI and LLM technology, some folks are saying, well, oh, like, maybe we can do search and match ourselves. And then when they start looking at like what it would take to kind of build such products, they realize that compliance is a big component of that. But it's also just one component of what it takes to build a really great talent match system. And so we've found that by partnering with Credo, by kind of like thinking about trustworthiness from compliance from the get-go, we're able to kind of accelerate kind of our go-to-market there and build up this reputation as a trustworthy brand that's really focused on this work.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kathleen, for sharing that. And as I mentioned before, like, the the HR, the hiring space has been one that is early, in terms of kind of how policymakers have been thinking about AI regulation in that space. So really great to get your perspective, since I think you've probably had a little more experience than a lot of other folks coming from other industries that are just starting to see some of these new laws and regs coming through. Great. Well, definitely want to take some of the questions that we're getting in the chat. Please keep them coming. We're seeing a few great ones already. The first one that I want to start with, I really like this one. So the question is, how much do companies building AI solutions care about governance in October 2025? Most folks I talk to, they say they'll see, right, when it comes to governance, even despite the EU AI Act. Um, it seems the AI governance at the moment is more of a cultural need than a governance need. I think this is really interesting, especially, and the question goes on to say some reports say that major tech firms have expressed they will not comply with the EU AI Act as this negatively impact other organizations. Um, so these are great points, and I think ties really well into the theme of this webinar, right, which is going beyond compliance, right? If we were to actually look at some of those stats that I was sharing at the start in terms of, hey, a lot of companies, they can't get their pilots off the ground, or they have to cut a lot of funding for AI, or not cut funding for AI, but cut off projects. Very little of that is actually related to the EU AI Act, right? Or very little of that is actually related to laws or regulations that are coming through. What we have a bunch of stories with customers that we work with, who are selling AI products. The challenges that they've been seeing is their buyers don't want to buy because they don't trust their systems. And actually, a great quote I've gotten was, the EU AI Act compliance is not actually a bottleneck to adoption or being able to sell AI products faster. Actually, it would be an enhancement because it at least defines, hey, what are the criteria for trust? So I can say, hey, I've met this particular criteria, so my customers can trust me. And so I think that a lot of companies need to be thinking about, what can I do to make, trust a competitive advantage, right? Especially as we think about how AI is being used now. It's no longer really a strong competitive advantage to be able to ship features faster than your competitors, because everyone can do that now with coding agents, or to say, I know I have a larger customer success team, because a lot of that, right, can be supported by automations. And so, Kathleen, I think AdeptID, again, another reason why I'm such a big fan is, like, this is really a forefront of your strategy, right? Like, how can trust be a competitive advantage? And I'm curious, how you think about that and how you've seen that actually kind of result in benefits for your company overall.
Definitely. And so we have always been very transparent, kind of from the beginning, that this is a very kind of key differentiator and an important factor for us. And so specifically kind of when it comes to the EU AI Act, I would certainly agree with your statement that, like, this has not been a bottleneck at all, in the sense that we found kind of that, talking to customers in the EU, like, they expect compliance with the EU AI Act. It's kind of not even a question if we would comply with it. And so I think some of that probably stems a little bit from the fact that hiring does kind of have like a little bit more regulation predating AI. So there is kind of a bit of precedent there to it. But I think there's also just certainly this broader awareness that this is a high stakes use case, and we need to be incredibly intentional about it. And so I think that is something that we are kind of attempting to lead with in these conversations, and say, okay, yes, this is exactly how we're monitoring our models. These are the outcomes we're looking for. This is the type of red teaming we perform. These are the audits that we're looking at, and being very transparent and sharing that with customers.
Awesome. Yeah. And I think the the spirit of the question is related to kind of governance being a cultural need, and making sure that the ecosystem as a whole, our industries as a whole, are really kind of like forwarding governance. I think, Kathleen, what you shared about making what you're doing transparent, making good governance transparent, is really important, right? Because right now there are some ideas around what good governance looks like, but it still is like a relatively new technology, or at least kind of at the scope and a level of adoption that we're seeing today. And so, as we learn what works, we want to make sure that we're sharing that as broadly as possible. So, love that you're doing that. Um, you brought so another question that comes to mind, and it's related to what you're talking about, Kathleen, about there being a bunch of different regulations, right? When we think about governing AI systems, there's kind of this narrative that like, or maybe more so about a year ago, and it's like AI regulation is the wild, wild west, but that's never really was never really the case, right? We've had frameworks in place, like you mentioned, as it relates to civil rights, as it relates to model risk management has been in certain industries like financial services for a really long time. I'm curious if you can talk a little bit more about, right, like how are you tackling all of these different kind of um, elements that make up compliance of an AI system, not just like those that are AI specific, but even like general software standards like accessibility and security, or right, those sector specific laws that don't necessarily relate to AI. How does all of that kind of fit into you making a decision about whether or not we deploy or develop this system?
Yeah, that's it. There's a lot to keep track of, certainly. And so we kind of internally have a work stream around this that is tracking kind of what you're talking about, like the more kind of standard software things, like GDPR, I think is a good example of that. That I guess as far as AI regulation goes, it's a little bit old at this point in time, and right. But like your SOC 2 compliance, things like that. And so we have kind of folks that are ensuring compliance with that. And then we also just kind of have started to get into a cadence around these things, because a lot of them require annual documentation and annual audits. For example, like New York Local 144 is a good one of that. And so when we think about how we kind of do work, there's the work that is kind of always happening to monitor kind of deployed products. And so we're measuring fairness outcomes for different products. Then we're also looking at that from a model update perspective. If we have a dev cycle, we're baking time into that to ensure that kind of our prior commitments are up to date. But then also we just kind of have a governance work stream where we're kind of honestly very heavily leaning on the Credo AI team and having a lot of these conversations, where what we've at least discovered, and I'm sure many companies are starting to discover, is that January 1st has become like this really important date when all of a sudden a bunch of new kind of regulation and legislation lights up. And so we kind of start having this conversation in terms of our like cycle planning in, the summertime, where we start having conversations with the Credo folks and we say, okay, here's like what's on our radar, what's on your radar. And so we have this conversation, as early as possible to say, okay, we think Utah is going to apply. We think, California is not going to apply. And so then we're kind of able to have these conversations where we're actually kind of building like a mini dev cycle around, collecting the evidence or providing whatever documentation is needed and filling out those policy packs. And so we found that to be a pretty effective approach of knowing that there's like some work that you track that you have to do annually. There's the work you need to do with every kind of model development. And then there's the work you do to kick off what will eventually become an annual process.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And as I think about kind of, we sort of saw this with GDPR, where GDPR passes, folks know what the regulation, what's included in the regulation, they know what they have to do, but it was kind of like this deer in the headlights moment where the industry was like waiting for so long to actually do anything about it, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh man, this is going into effect in like 3 months and I don't have any of my disclaimers, and then throw a bunch of money into like actually getting ready in a really fast way, like hiring consultants, et cetera. I mean, one of the nice things about all of these laws and regulations, right, is that they'll pass, and then here's a period where you can get into compliance. And so, I think to your point exactly, like knowing what those are and having a plan to get compliant is really the best way to like get ahead of all of this. So we have time for about one more question, and I think a really good one. I see that, a lot of folks are probably, have in mind. What's a good first step that an organization can do to enable AI governance? And I can maybe kick off with you know, because we get this a lot at Credo AI, and we really do, value and encourage like a crawl, walk, run approach, right? Like there's a version of AI governance that is, incredibly mature, right? It has all of these integrations with your other tools. But if you're looking for just a good first step, it's, knowing at your organization, hey, what AI systems do we have, right? Like I think we have a lot of CISOs or CTOs ask us this question. You say, hey, what are the AI systems at your organization? And they don't know. And so that first step, I think, is just having a registry and like a process to take in systems that your teams are using. And this is really beneficial for a couple of things, kind of on the risk and compliance side. Your AI governance leads, your CISOs can, have an understanding of what systems do we need to be accounting for and start to develop plans to make sure we're compliant in addressing risks. But from kind of the enablement and adoption side, like it's really good for, employees at your organization to know what AI systems are even available for them to use and do their jobs better, right? And automate some of the stuff that they don't want to worry about. So I think that, yeah, that first step really is just having a good registry and a process to kind of, identify what systems are at your organization. But yeah, Kathleen, curious if you have any other thoughts as well, like first step that we can do to enable governance.
I think what you said is really spot on. I think I would probably just take it like slightly further and say you need a good registry, but you also need it to be up to date. And knowing that like this is not like an initial task, but like viewing kind of compliance and governance as just it's just a work stream. It's like part of what we do, the way you would think about like performance testing, right? Because you want all of that like goodness from your first initial kind of collection of registering these use cases to continue to be valuable as those use cases evolve. And so for us, this is kind of like to make it a little concrete when we think about making model updates, we're also updating our kind of documentation within the Credo platform so that we kind of always have like the latest version of how these use cases are being used, what's exactly kind of underneath them. I think that would certainly be a good step is like, you're going to do this step, but then I think be extra good to yourself and commit to that being kind of a journey.
That's such a great point. Yeah, I think there's kind of the technology element, right? Whether it's, something as simple as like, hey, here's your spreadsheet, right, with everything, which I would say is like, maybe like the step zero, and you want to move a little bit beyond that. But making sure that you have processes to make sure that that is, to your point, like a living document and up to date and like an actual reliable single source of truth. Well, Kathleen, it's been awesome to chat with you, and even better to be working with you over, all this time. And thank you for bringing your expertise, and again for the work that y'all are doing at AdeptID for our ecosystem as a whole.
Thanks so much, Eric. Thanks for having me. And everybody at AdeptID certainly appreciates the Credo Adept partnership. So thank you.
Awesome. And thanks for all of you for joining us. We're going to be posting a recording of this for those who might want to share it. And yeah, we'll see you next time. Take care.